Coming up this week on our TDL Synth Chat show, we're talking to Beat Zimmermann, and he's a musician, keyboard player. We'll be talking about his love of music, synthesizers, and how he got into music, and his new project with Michael Sadler from Saga on vocals as well. So a really exciting project he's working on. So we'll be talking about getting started in the music industry, some of the equipment he's used, some of his favourite synths that he's used over time, and the stuff that he's using now on his new productions. So we'll talk about his new production as well. So I think you'll enjoy this one. So Beat, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ian. Thanks for having me.
It's great to get you on the show. We've chatted over Messenger and type things for a while, and I think we sort of met on the vintage synth forums, and I know you've got a love of music, and that ties in nice with that background as well. So I like the background that you've got on there. But yeah, so I wanted to talk music and synthesizers, electronic music. But before we do that, I just wanted to get a bit of background on you and how you got into music.
Yeah, I wouldn't say forced, but it was a kind of a standard to play the recorder, the flute.
Oh yeah. When
I was 6 years old, and I had an older brother who also played that instrument and some other stuff, and he was very musical, and he pushed me, and relatively quickly, obviously, I seemed to show some musical talent, and then with 10 years, I changed to the piano. And I took classical lessons from a concert pianist, and my progress was relatively quickly. I was soon enough playing stuff like, not the whole cyclist, but Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition, and Tchaikovsky Season, and Beethoven sonatas and stuff like that. I wasn't actually aware that I would be good enough to play in a band, when I was, say, 16, 17. Only at some point when I paid closer attention to what people play on the synthesizers, I noticed, well, I could play that, The only problem was my parents didn't think it was a good idea. So I struggled a bit actually, getting into that music scenes, playing modern music, not only classical stuff.
Yeah, so were your parents sort of classical music fans?
Yeah, they were classical music fans, and they were also singing in the church choir, and so yeah. And I think my dad even had a conductor's education or something. But funny enough, I wanted to become a classical piano player and study at the Conservatory of Music in Bern, and my parents didn't really support that because they didn't think I was good enough. So it was, they grew up in an environment where I think that the ones that are good are always elsewhere. That was true for music, sports, what have you. And so it was like, for them, it was difficult to understand that they have a son that would actually have the level to do that. So there was not really much support. So I gave up on the idea when I was 20 and pursued another career in air traffic control, but I still played a lot and practiced. And then later, when I was my own boss, so to speak, I decided to study still. When I was 29 years old or something, I then joined the University of Arts and studied the piano, but jazz this time, no more classical.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of music was it that sort of drew you back into that?
Well, you mean what kind of music?
Yeah, what was the music that was driving you? And listen to.
I think when I was young, when I was 20 and started to play rock music, I was mainly into prog and neo-prog and that kind of stuff. Saga was big for me at the time, funny enough. And but I was an arrogant bastard, to put it mildly. So, I had no clue about jazz. I had no clue about blues. So I was trying to avoid those areas instead of actually diving into it and learning. I was a snot, say, I'm not touching this, I'm not interested in this. And only later I became a bit more humble and figured out that it's time to actually learn those areas where I have no clue about. And that's how I drifted into the jazz side. And eventually I then had a level that was good enough to actually study in the bachelor's degree program. You know.
Yeah, it's fun. I think if you're a keyboard player, I think prog does have so much depth in there that it can really draw you in. I mean, I love sort of Genesis and all that prog era. But I noticed I was reading your bio and stuff. You mentioned also sort of fusion as well, and I think on one of your videos I watched today, you mentioned Jan Hammer, which is another one of my favorites. So were you getting into sort of fusion and Mahavishnu orchestra and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I did during my studies at the University of Arts. I was never the super straight ahead jazz fan, or especially bebop. I appreciated the artists. I have big respect for all these guys, be it Miles or Charlie Parker, but I never really liked their music much. So I liked some straight ahead jazz, but more the lyrical stuff. But fusion was something that really I got addicted right away. But probably also because of the musicianship that is showcased there. I don't know. And there are some really outstanding keyboard players like Jan Hammer. I really like him. I think he's vastly underrated. Probably we need to say that because he's not so widely known, is he? I mean, yes, Miami Vice and so on and so forth. But many people probably know that theme from Miami Vice, have no clue who played that.
Yeah, and if you ever see him play in the Minimoog in sort of his fusion Mahavishnu style, or playing with Jeff Beck or something, it's amazing watching him play.
Okay. Yeah.
So, what instruments were you sort of drawn to playing then? Was it just straight piano organ, or were you getting into synthesizers then?
Yeah, I was a synthesizer addict quite early on when I was a teen still. Organ was never my thing really. Obviously I played some stuff with organ sounds, but I'm not a real Hammond specialist with all the dead notes and the stuff that people play on them. But since, very early. I mean, I remember when I was, say, 16, 17, I was, wishing desperately for my first synth. And most of them were unaffordable at the time. There was the Jupiter 6s and the Oberheims, and PPG was out. And I mean, no way I could even get close to anything like that. And then I remember at the display window of the local music store there, all of a sudden there was a Juno 60, and that was, I think that kind of marked the start of a more affordable synthesizer era, I think, right? And then the Poly 61 came out, and then the JX3P and so on. And I remember I flattened my nose at that window, and my parents didn't think I needed a synthesizer, so I had to save money. A couple of years later, I bought myself a DX7, which I'm not sure was the right decision, to be honest, because I think the first synthesizer would probably be better to be something like bread and butter, like a JX3P.
Yeah.
So I was lucky in the band that I played at the time, and in the rehearsal room, there was another band. And that keyboardist had a Rhodes and a JX3P. So he said, "Oh, you can use my stuff if I can use your stuff." So in the end, I had a pretty good combo with the JX3P and the DX7.
The JX3P was a lovely synth. And I've told this on the show a few times now, but I had one. I bought one in probably 1991, 92 when they were cheap. Right. And then I sold it in probably the late 90s, thinking, I don't really need this now. And of course, now I wish I'd kept that because it's such a classic. I had the program and everything, and to rebuy it was really expensive. But
if I kept everything I owned, I could be selling them for handsome money now. I started off when I was 18 years old. I had a PF80 piano, which was my master keyboard, and I had my master brain to actually control all the synths which I had in the rack. was a Yamaha MEP4. Not sure if you ever heard about it. It's called MIDI
The
events.
MIDI router
Yeah,
thing.
it's a MIDI events processor. So you could actually change MIDI events into other MIDI events, for example. And the good thing about the MEP4 was you could, for example, when you change the patch of the synth, you can also assign a volume through the MIDI controls. So you can pre-mix the whole setup already without actually, turning knobs on the mixer itself. And also you could do tricks like programming a note off and switching it to a program change somewhere on the side of the keyboard, for example. So if you just, at some point I had 4 rack synths, but 1 keyboard. And if in the whole setup just 1 sound changes, you could just program the program change on a note off and just say, hit the note. And then when you leave the note, the patch would switch.
Yeah.
So that was a cool piece of kit. I still have it actually somewhere in my garage. I have no clue if it still works. It's in the rack and it's protected and everything. I never brought it out for 20 years or so because I had no need for it. And in the rack, I started off with the DW. No, what is it called? In the rack, it's called EX 8000.
EX. Oh, I've just got a DW 8000 actually.
All right. I thought that was a lovely bread and butter synth, I think, with possibility to have nice pads, but also FM sounds and so on. And the second one I had originally was a Krumar, a Bit 01. That was the Bit 1 expander version. Had a white panel that looked really funky, I must say. But it was not very stable in tune, so at some point I was completely unnerved and threw it out. Then I had a D550 in the rack, Roland. I think those are also quite expensive nowadays.
Yeah, right? I think they are. Yeah, I've got a D110, which is like the cut down version of it. But yeah, I always wanted the D50, but couldn't. It was always too expensive at the time.
And a Prophet VS. Actually,
nice.
That one would be probably quite rare today. Right? Prophet VS and Emax, the original versions without synthesizer section and without hard disk. So it was always a fumbling around business with the floppies and everything. And then the floppy wouldn't load and you would panic. And I don't fondly remember. I changed the Emax for a M1 rack at some point then.
So you were always going for rack at that stage because you had the controller.
Yeah, at that stage I was a purist I didn't really want to play synthesizer keybeds. I wanted something that's weighted and piano-like. And I just wanted 188 keyboard on the stage, and then I just had the 2 racks with 10 height units. That was it. But that changed later when I studied at the academy. I started to do like multi-keyboard setups. So I think for soloing on the synthesizer is actually better to have a synthesizer keybed. Yeah,
and were you doing sort of into doing sound design then, or were you doing what a lot were doing then, especially with DXs and things, going for presets?
Yeah, I was always trying to do sound design. But I must say, building sounds from scratch, I was never good at. Not like the Steve Porcaros and the Ian Dixons of this world. But I know especially how subtractive synthesis works, and I know where to turn the knob when I don't like the actual sound. I want to change something. So I did a bit of that. There was a patch that I said that's actually pretty good basis, but it's not what I want, and then I turn the knob here and there, which obviously is cool nowadays that those user interfaces are back with the actual knobs, right, and the potties and everything. Yeah. In the rack synthesizers, that was always a little bit hassle that you had to go and look for the parameter and then tap, look for the right value and with the arrows up and down and so on. So
Yeah, I suppose programming something like a D550 from the rack is not the easiest thing to do. There's so many parameters and
Yeah,
a small
exactly.
display.
And you had to go underneath. There was this thing where you could select, now it's that parameter. Yeah, that was very, let's say, unintuitive to actually program. Yeah.
But at that sort of era as well, starting from the DX7 and even the DW8000 and all instruments that came after that were all parameter control, really. And it wasn't until sort of till the late 90s then the virtual analogs and things came back.
Exactly, the Nord lead and all these and viruses came back. Yeah, I have a Sledge here in the studio where I like that quite a lot because it's so intuitive. You just go and look for the knob and you can turn. You hear immediately what's changing.
So did you, when you got into the into the 90s or into the late 80s into the 90s, was that when you were starting your own bands and getting into sort of prog bands?
Yeah, I started my first band. My first band that was, that had a reputation at some point in Switzerland was, I started in '86, I think. Yeah, and we were active until '94, I think, with various degrees of success. We also played the final of a contest called Yamaha Live for Tokyo, which is a worldwide thing they had at the time, where they selected a bunch of bands to play in the Budokan Hall for a worldwide final. And so we were in the Swiss final, like 8 bands out of 300 or something. Well, that's where the journey ended, and that was my prog time. And it was a band that was very oriented towards those synth bands like Genesis, Saga, Marillion, and what else, Journey, but also a bit of Toto. And I mean, not reaching their musical level, of course, at the time, but that were the influences. And also myself, I was a big Emerson, Lake and Palmer fan at the time. Yeah.
And so then at that point, that's when you went you were there studying and then went sort of more down the jazz sort of fusion type route into the late 90s.
Right. That's right. I started studying. I mean, I did the preliminary studies of the bachelor's program, I think starting from 96 or something. And then in 99, I entered the actual professional education at the University of Arts, with piano as a main and drums as a second.
And then, so in that sort of period, what synths were you looking at then?
At that time, I had Trinities. I had, and those I still have actually, also somewhere in the storage. And I had one version of all of them. So I have a Pro X, I have a Pro, and I have a 61 key version. And I like them. I just, at some point, I don't know what it is, but at some point you move on and then put those aside. But I never wanted to get rid of them, to be honest, because I really liked them, and also they mark an important period in my life, that's for sure.
Yeah.
They work. They're in mint condition, as far as I know, at least.
Yeah, they are nice synths, and I have a Karma, which is the version of the Triton, which came after the Trinity, didn't it? But I heard a few people say that they prefer the sound of the Trinities over the Triton. Maybe it's something to do with the components, or more premium components, or something like that.
Okay. I never played a Triton. I had a student who had a Triton, and he was quite happy with it. But it's always very difficult I heard the Triton a couple of times, but it's always very difficult if you can't compare directly.
Yeah. So in that sort of period, as you went from the Trinities, what would you be your go-to instrument then?
At that time I also was a piano addict, so I really liked to be a pianist purist, and so the Trinities were my instruments on the side whenever I needed them for fusion. And then later, I really had a custom built live setup for the fusion band that I ran, and that was actually quite complicated. So I had a master keyboard, an Acuna 88 from Studio Logic. And then on top, I used the Trinity, the Pro, the 76 key one. And then on the right side, at 90 degrees, I put a Yamaha S80, which I could have replaced by anything else, really. I could have put the big Trinity there, or I chose that. I still have all of that. The S80 I gave to a friend of mine who wanted to try and play the keyboards a little bit. So I said, instead of this piece of equipment standing around in my garage, have it and try it, So, but if I need it, I could call it back. And then I had a custom built rack by a friend of mine who built racks for guitar players and keyboardists, and he really did nice stuff. You would give him the equipment, and then he would really put them in, and all the connections he would pull out and put on an aluminum plate at the very back of the rack, for example. So you wouldn't have to go inside the rack
for
the connections, right? So you could just plug in everything, and it's all right, all with a label and so on and so forth. So that was pretty cool. And in there, and that's actually sitting here next to me in my studio still. I just don't really use it much, but it's sitting there just for the sake of it. And that it's got a Waldorf Q in there. It's got a Novation Supernova, and it's got a General Music MIDI piano and a Kurzweil micro piano. So those four were rack versions, and then obviously the S80 and the Trinity also had sound engines. And the idea was that I could trigger any of the 6 sound engines from any of the 3 keyboards. And for that, I bought myself a vintage Akai patch bay, where you can route the MIDI accordingly, right, from any keyboard to any output. It was a very complicated setup in the end, but it was quite fun, I must say.
So in that period, then into the 2000s, were you live playing or mainly studio playing? No,
at that time I was still playing live a lot. So I totaled like between 80 and 100 shows per year with different combos.
And then, so did you did you have a studio at that time, or is that something that came later?
I just had the Korg workstation. I used the Trinity workstation sometimes to record a couple of things. I also had a hard disk connected to it because that has a 4-track hard disk recording function, right? But it was very complicated with that small display that you have on the Trinity, and it was a lot of fumbling. But I did a few things. I did jingles and stuff. No, the studio I only built later when I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or so, I started building the studio. That was also the reason why I then started with the album, because I thought I should now record all those ideas that piled up and never got, attention really, or at least not enough attention.
So when it came to building your studio, then did you go down the sort of the software route, or were you still into the hardware?
Yeah, I mean, when I set it up, I still had hardware a lot. I mean, I had originally I put the Studio Logic Numa Concert, the piano. That's a piano I really like. It's got a wooden Fatar keyboard with a good hammer action. I still have that. The sound engine gave up on me about 2 months ago, so now I'm just using a Piano Tech software piano. And I think at the very beginning, I had the Trinity in the studio as well, the small one, the 61 key one. And at some point I exchanged that because there was a problem with the key, and I had to turn it into to the music store for repair. And I said, I need a 61 key keyboard. And I saw the Arturia Keylab, so I bought that. And this is what got me into the software stuff, really, because then that comes with the Arturia collection. And I figured out, well, that's actually quite cool for the studio. Not as I told you, I'm not sure I would go down that route for live now. I might try. I don't know. I don't have to decide because I'm not playing live at the moment. But that got me into it, and I started to try out those vintage instruments in software format, and I thought they were pretty convincing actually compared to the originals. And also having the effect sections on board, I thought was quite an advantage for recording. And so that got me addicted to the software, and also thought that the synthesizers and samplers that I have on board in the Logic, which is the DAW I use, they are pretty strong too. They have good sounds, they have good user interfaces if you want to change something. So that got me into software, and I thought for studio work, I don't necessarily see a reason why I should bring in a hardware synth anymore. But again, that's me. I understand people say no, it's not the same. But for me, it works well. I must say, for studio work, it works well. And now, actually, there's only one synth that I have in the studio. The rest is just master keyboards, and that's the Waldorf, actually Studio Logic Sledge with the Waldorf wavetable engine in there. And I use that for practicing. I don't really use it for, I do record with it, but I don't use the sound to record it,
Yeah, I think I found I like the keyboards, so I have the keyboards, and especially sound design, it's easy to do it on the keyboards, but quite often when I'm recording tracks, I use the multi-poly a lot, the hardware, but I've got the native version, so I'll tend to do the sound design and do the piece that, the track piece or that particular part on the real synth, and then go, right, I've done that now, I've done it in MIDI, I'll pass it off to the virtual version, and I can use the real keyboard then to do the next part, and you can build it up. It is convenient. And then if you want to go back and change stuff, it's easy to do. And but then, like I said, I recently got the DW8000, and bit of on a whim, I wanted to get another vintage, and I do love having that hands-on control with the vintage.
As I said, for live, I would probably go for a totally different approach. I'm not sure I would want to go with just the laptop and have sounds from there. I might want to try it just to have done that, but I still believe in what happens if that bloody laptop crashes.
Yeah.
And I was, as you know, I'm making this album with Michael Sadler from Saga, and we spoke about their keyboards, and actually Daryl Jim Gilmore, he uses a laptop with the sounds on it, but he still has his Korg Chronoses, I think 4 of them or something, as a fallback scenario.
Yeah,
I think he uses the Korg software versions in principle, but should he have a crash with the laptop, he can still revert.
Yeah, I think when you're playing live, I think when you're in the studio, you've got a bit more flexibility and control of it, and even with the vintage guy, I love the vintage kit, but I guess if you're touring, you don't really want to be touring with a load of vintage gear unless you've got the money to be able to have backup vintage, backup vintage gear, which is not something everybody can do.
Yeah, or you just know it's working seamlessly. That's my point about vintage stuff. I like them. I have no emotions about them. I wouldn't pay $4,500 for a Uno 60. I don't think it's worth that. But I understand that people do because it's a collector's item. It's like used cars. Vintage cars, right? Either you're addicted to that or you're not. You're ready to pay those amounts of money for it because it's a collector's item, or you're not. And I would be a person who's not. If I can get a good deal for for a good vintage synth, yeah, why not? Recently, a friend of mine called me and said, "What about the Matrix 12?" I said, "What? Yeah, what about it?" He said, "I could buy one for 3,000." I said, "Yeah, I mean, the guy was not a keyboardist. That's the point." You know, I said, "What do you want to do with it?" Yeah. I mean, it's a good price for a Matrix 12, I think, 3,000. But if you really want to buy a synth just for the sake of buying a synth, and buy a new one that's reliable, you know.
Yeah.
You know this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you see the prices of like Jupiter 8s and things like that. It's just crazy money.
Yeah. Or the DX1. I saw an ad recently for a DX1. I think it was 135,000 or something like that.
Yeah. So you weren't tempted?
Not really.
No.
No. I mean that would, you know, I can pay for about 3 productions with top of the world musicians with that money.
Yeah. Yeah. So just tell us about this. So you built your studio and then you thought, well, I want to do something with it. So tell us about this new project that you're working on.
Yeah, that it's as I said, this was the trigger to say, actually, I should record my ideas that piled up over the years. Some date back to the late 80s and early 90s even, but they never got recorded or they never got paid enough attention to, really. So I thought, now that I have my studio, I better record that stuff, you know. So I recorded this. I did demo tracks. Well, I did the drums myself, but I mean, with the help of AI and my knowledge of drumming, because I studied the drums as a second instrument. And I have a wave drum from Korg, if you know them. You know, it's like a pad synthesizer, drum synthesizer pad. So I was able to create fairly organic and convincing drum tracks, and I played the bass with the keyboards on it. And when everything was done, I thought, this sounds pretty cool. I should get a real guitar. I had some guitar parts played on the synth, and I thought I should get a real guitar player on that to see how that comes along. And then I called my friend Slatko, who used to play with another synth band, Tangerine Dream. Not sure if you.
Oh, love Tangerine. Yeah, I'm going watching them next Friday.
Yeah, he was the guitar player of Tangerine Dream in the 90s.
Oh, I would have seen him then. Yeah.
And so he's a longtime buddy of mine. So I called him and said, "Hey, I've got a bunch of compositions. I need some guitars on it. Can you do something?" And he said, "Yeah, sure. Send them over." And so he said, "So did you play anything that I need to play?" I said, "Yeah, please do those. What I recorded, do those parts as guitar parts, but also whatever you think would fit. You know, come up with your own stuff. You know." And then he sent the tracks over, and it blew me off the chair, and I said, "Shit, this sounds really big, so it would be a pity not to pursue that." And then so on we went, and at some point I did scratch vocals myself, because I really wanted, you know, that a potential singer would have an idea what I hear. Now, problem is, yeah, I can sing, I'm not great, but anything which is intonation issues I can fix in the studio, and but it's still my voice, right? So I found an AI platform called lalals.com, where you can go and throw any audio file in, and then select how it should sound when it comes out. So you could throw an audio file in and say, "Okay, you know, I want this to sound like Phil Collins or Steve Perry or Michael Jackson or Michael Bublé or what have you." And originally I thought, yeah, come on, that's not going to work. And I did a test with Phil Collins. I said, "Are you kidding me? I mean, it's Phil Collins singing here." So I did all the tracks like that, the scratch vocals myself, and then I ran it through that engine, and I think like 7 out of 9 songs I did with Phil Collins's voice. 2 I did with Steve Perry's, and then the background voices I took some girls, because I had to go high and I had to sing falsetto. And so I had Beyonce and Lady Gaga and Adele in my backgrounds, you know. So the thing sounded big at some point. And then I remembered Quincy Jones saying at some point that as a producer you should always get the best possible musicians to play your stuff, you know. So I thought, okay, let's be bold, you know. I mean, Slatko Perica already is quite a classic guitar player, but so if I had a wish free from a genie, who would I ask to sing that stuff? And there was not a second of a hesitation that this would be Michael Sadler from Saga. So I thought, let's ask him, you know. So I asked his wife, actually doing the management for him. So I contacted them and said, would Michael be available for something like that? Would it matter that I'm pretty much a no-name? Yes, I played with Ronan Keating and the Bellamy Brothers at some point, but still, I'm not known, right? And she said, yeah, that's not the issue. The issue is he needs to like your stuff. So send over the tracks and we'll listen to it. And he'll get back to you. And 3 days later, he called me and said, hey, good stuff. I would love to be on it.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And then, yeah, we figured out how this is going to be. And then he said, well, you know, ideally, he would like to be involved also, you know, in the process of arranging and everything, so we could bounce ideas back and forth and so on. That's what we did in the end. And then we got, I thought, as I'm at it, let's continue. And I then got Todd Sucherman from Styx for the drum parts, you know. And it turned out that this was the perfect choice. I mean, he's such a good fit for this kind of music. And yeah, there we are. So Michael is in the final stage. He just told me today that there's 2 more songs that he wants to review and maybe just sing an additional track to figure out which take he wants to use. The bass is still recording. I think he still needs to do 5 tracks. Excuse me. And then it should go to mixing. The plan is to release in autumn, like late September, early October, if it works with all the pressing plants and everything. We certainly will get a single out first, or 1 or 2, and maybe June or so. First end of May, beginning of June. And yeah, the whole thing is called Unicorn Umbrellas, is the title of the project, and Every Picture Tells a Story is the title of the album.
And this is working remotely as well. So you're working your studio, and then you're passing the sound files.
That's what we did. I mean, Slatko is not too far from me. I could go there if necessary. And the bass player, he's even closer actually. But Michael obviously is in the US, and Todd, he's in Austin, Texas. So yeah, we worked remotely. And what I learned from those guys also is I intuitively did that already, but they said, if you work like that, don't overdo the tinkering business by, you know, let's do that take and then punch in and, you know, we can cut and paste and so on and so forth, because they are of the view that you can hear that. And I think they have a point. So they said, when we work like this, even more than in other situations, when we go into a studio as a whole band, we want to record performances. That is, once we are sure what we want to do, we go and make a take from A to Z. And that's something I really try to do as well, you know, to actually perform rather than, you know, put for the writing of the song. Yes, I would put a part here and then copy and paste, but once I was happy, I would actually make a take from A to Z and play the whole part through.
And then what kind of it's always difficult to say. What kind of music would you say, or category of music would you say it is?
Yeah, I mean, it probably qualifies as neo-prog. It certainly goes in the direction of those bands, Saga, Journey. People who have heard it, they say they hear they hear my fusion heart a little bit through it, because maybe some of the soloing is like that, or the voicings and so on. I don't pay attention too much. For me, it's rock, but there is a possibility, because I haven't played much else other than when I played with Ronan Keating or the German Matthias Reim, where it was more poppy stuff. But mostly I practiced and played fusion for the last 20 years. And that probably manifests in my playing style.
Yeah, and I suppose it's satisfying that the thing about prog or neo-prog and fusion, the music to really get into and get your teeth into, isn't it? When you're composing, it's it's not just 3-minute pop songs with an auto-tune vocal and 4 chords. You really can throw something into it and really express yourself with it.
Yeah, that's cool. I must say I also reduced some of the tracks that I had. I said, let's less is more, and I reduced it to a real statement. I think we have a couple of 7-8 minutes. I think 7 or 8 minutes. We have a couple, and then there's one that's 5, and there's a couple that are over 4. But I don't have any 12 or 20 minutes epic tunes, so it should fit on one CD or LP.
Yeah. And so is it? So how would you plan to release this, with vinyl and CD download, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we're going to stream. What I'm trying to do is a bit of a limited edition up front with a CD with a nice digipack and a 24-page booklet. And my intention is actually to really also go down the vinyl lane and do a 180 gram audio file, and nice looking.
Yeah,
that's a little bit more expensive also, because I don't have a label behind me. I just basically pay for this, and then try to retrieve some of the investment through that.
Yeah.
Obviously through the platforms it's not going to happen, but with limited editions that are signed by all the musicians, especially have those 2 guys, Michael and Todd, on board, is maybe going to have a bit of leverage to get some sales out there.
Yeah, I mean, it's the state of where you are now, is it? The streaming platforms, you're certainly not going to make any money off those, but you need to have it to get it out there, don't you? But I think
I don't really have any bad feelings about the streaming platforms, to be honest. I'm not in a position to complain, because I'm not a guy who ever sold thousands of records. I mean, those guys who like Saga or Styx or Genesis, I mean, they can complain, because for them the whole business changed, right? Before, they made pretty good money by selling records, and all of a sudden they don't, and then they have to go touring to make the money. And for us unknown guys, like 99.999999% of the musicians in the world, it's actually quite cool that you don't have to go and beg to an A&R manager at a label and say, hey, here's my demo, what about? And he goes like, it's not the right time for it, or something. So you can actually just choose a distributor and stream, and then you have the potential to reach thousands in the best case, right? So
yeah, I put my stuff on Spotify more of a, just because it's like, I'd love to have my music on Spotify, so I put mine on there. You don't make any money off of it, but that's not why I wanted to put it on there. I just wanted it to be there. It was nice to see it on there.
I think it's cool, because that means now that there's a potential that people can listen to your music while if you tried this 20 years ago, 30 years ago, do you think you would have gotten a record deal with the same music? Maybe not. So it was always a lottery, wasn't it?
Mm.
I had a friend who was working as an A&R, and he said, "Hey, back in the 80s, 90s, he said, I'm getting so many demos and CDs. He got like a 35-liter trash bag per day from bands that wanted a record deal." And I said, "There's no way I can listen through all this, And I said, "So how do you do it?" He said, "Well, sometimes I just blindly go into the back and pick something and listen to it. And if it doesn't convince me in 5 seconds, I throw it out.
Yeah.
Or I go by the cover, or I go by the name, depending. That's how I buy. There's no way I can listen to all of this."
Mm. Yeah, and I suppose with algorithms and things, hopefully that you hope that if you do put your stuff up there, there is some way that someone will discover it that wouldn't necessarily heard you before.
Yeah.
But I think like the project
there's always the chance that somebody hears about it and then just gives it a try and say, "Hey, this is actually pretty good," and then he spreads it over social platforms and so on. You never know.
Yeah, but that's where something where it's a good. The project that you're working on now is good, is it? Because you have got names with credentials in the in their like prog and different avenues, so that can bring people in. They come because they want to hear the singer from Saga, but then they listen to it and then they take it on from there. So it's a sort of a nice way of doing it.
Right.
Yeah. So something I've asked everybody just to finish off. So in terms of what I've asked everybody is, what synth have you had and sold that you wish you hadn't, and what synth would you like to buy? What's the one dream synth you'd like to have? So I think that'd be quite difficult for you because you come down a different way with the software and everything else.
Yeah, I mean a synth I would like to have. There's a couple that I could be happy with. I think the PPG Wave 2.2 is one of them that I wouldn't mind owning in reality. Other than that, I'm having sold my synths. I'm quite emotionless, but still, I mean, let me think. What did I own? And maybe the Prophet VS was just for the fact that it's quite a rare piece of kit now. Could be one that I can say, yeah, I shouldn't have, because I actually traded it for an Akai sampler or something that I don't think I ever touched. And I don't know why I did this, to be honest. I have no clue what I smoked. There was no reason to do it. So
maybe that one.
Yes, I regret a little bit, especially the way I traded it, and it just got lost in the end. The others I don't really mind. I mean the M1R, it's not. I could get one today. It's not. They are on the market. They're not super expensive.
No.
I had a JX8P at some point that I can't even remember who I sold that to, but that one also. I mean, the interesting thing about those synths is they are completely free of any effect section, right?
Yeah, that's something we were chatting online earlier on, wasn't it? That you get a modern synth like the Multipoly here, and you've got 4 effect slots on per layer. You've got 4 layers, so you can put tons of effects on there. But sometimes you've got to be careful you don't drown it with effects, so that you can't use it. That's
what I wrote to you in the chat, right? I wonder if this is overdone sometimes in live situations, because either it's my hearing or it's my personal perception that has changed. But I think many keyboard-oriented bands, I don't think the keyboards come across that crispy as they used to in the 80s, early 90s. And my hypothesis is it could be that, because if I remember that time, we sent I had 4 modules in the rack, and I sent a stereo sum to the front mixer, and I had a little bit of reverb. I didn't change the patch of the effects that I sent with the sound. Eventually, if the venue was bigger, I changed the reverb to something that had a little bit less hole, and if the venue was smaller, I put a little bit more. But that's it, you know. And today you layer 5, 6 synths, and each patch has its own effect section programmed. And if you layer those, maybe it's too much sometimes. Especially at bigger venues. You know?
Yeah.
So as you said, in programming, you're careful not to overdo it, especially when you want to use it live. You know.
Yeah, and I find that if you go light on it on the sound design, that means you can use it in your own tracks, or somebody else can use it in their tracks, and then you can dial up the effects as for the track rather than just a generic effect for everything. So yeah, I think there is a especially when you're buying synths on the the presets, the demo presets, they always sound fantastic, but when they're full of effects, you've got to hear them dial back a bit before you can really judge them.
Yeah, exactly. You put the headset on, you go like, oh wow, and it turns around your head.
Yeah.
But if you do that in a hall with bad acoustics, it's a different story, I think.
Yeah. So there is a bit of that. I think it's just getting the balance right, and that's when I suppose in the 80s you were getting good mixing engineers and good engineers in general just applying that taste to it rather than just a sound designer whacking loads of reverb on it because it sounds great when you hear it through your headphones on its own.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That.
Yeah.
Well, it's been absolutely brilliant chatting to you. I really enjoyed that. I'll include a link to your website on the show notes and on the YouTube description as well, so we can keep an eye on that. What's the best way of keeping up with you on your new project and finding about release dates and things?
Yeah, there's a Facebook page called Unicorn Umbrellas.
I'll include a link to that.
That would be a destination, or the website beatzimmermann.com, where I post updates regularly for sure. You know.
Yeah, and I said that there's a thing you can sign up, can't you, for notification or pre-sale type thing?
Yeah, exactly. You can even sign up for the pre-sale, so you get notified when we know exactly what we're going to put out as a limited edition, what's the package is, and so on and so forth.
And I think I should mention as well, you've got some video. I watched one on soloing today that you did.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's on my YouTube channel as well. And
that was
it's linked in the blog on the website.
Yeah. So I found that pretty interesting actually. So I'll make sure I include a link for that. Well, it's been absolutely brilliant chatting to you. So when the album's out, then I think it's probably a good idea to get you back on, and we'll talk about the actual album as well, because I'm looking forward to hearing that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Well, many thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Ian. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you tonight.
Thanks to Bear. I think I really enjoyed that. Thanks to Bear. I really enjoyed that one. It was great chatting to you. If you want to come on the show and talk about synths, please let me know. Ian at digital-lifestyle.com. I'd love to talk to you. If you want to talk to me about synthesizers. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.